I can always start if for any reason, alright? Okay,
Yeah.
so if you say you want to check, should we carry on?
Yep.
Oh, I think it's still very good.
All kinds of things in our everyday lives are affected by market research. It's the way government and industry finds out how we feel about everything from the colour of the toothpaste we choose to the political party we plan to vote for. And the main tool for the market researcher is the survey. In this program, we'll be following a survey conducted by a national market research company so we can find out about techniques that can be applied to a survey you might wish to conduct yourself. The particular example we're going to follow involves the Victorian Road Transport Corporation, VicRoads. VicRoads is about to put into place a program attempting to reduce accident injuries by encouraging manufacturers to add more safety features to their cars.
What we needed to do was to improve the occupant protection in a vehicle, and there's a couple of ways we could do it. We could do it by legislation, and that's a very slow, time-consuming process, and you've got to get all the states to agree in Australia. That's a problem. And occupant protection measures are now rapidly improving or developing so quickly that it's hard to keep pace with what is available and what they can and can't do. So the other alternative is to get market pressures and get the manufacturer to provide these sorts of features voluntarily, simply because the market demands it. And up until recently, there's been virtually no information given to the consumer. So we've decided to embark on a track of providing as much consumer information as we can as to the relative safety of different cars, the meaning of features, what a webbing clamp does, what a seatbelt tensioner does, how an airbag works, that sort of thing, and the importance of the compartment strength, all those types of issues.
So, VicRoads intends to educate the public about features that can increase the occupant safety of cars. In other words, how the car can be made to actually protect you in an accident. But as part of the process, VicRoads needs to be able to find out just what people already know about safety features. And as their education campaign proceeds, they also need to be able to monitor the effect it's having. This is market research, and this is where VicRoads has decided to use the services of the market research company, AGB McNair. The first step in any research project is to clearly identify the information you are seeking. In the case of this project, the objectives were decided on after meetings between VicRoads. Because VicRoads employs its own research experts, the objectives for the survey were clearly provided to the market research company. These were to find out about the current attitudes of car owners to occupant safety, the knowledge of car owners of vehicle safety issues, particularly occupant protection, and the relative importance of safety as a factor when buying a car. But identifying objectives for a research project isn't always this straightforward.
Looking at the objectives for a piece of research, sometimes the clients we deal with need a little bit of assistance in working out exactly what it is they want to do, because problems can be very large. And one of the most useful parts of market research is working out why you want to do the research in the first place. And that helps crystallise in the client's mind, or anyone else's mind, what the real problem is. Another related issue is that if you go ahead and collect a whole lot of information that you don't really need because you haven't worked out the objectives properly in the first place, it's just a waste of everyone's time, the researcher's time, the respondent's time, and so on.
With VicRoads, the research project was conducted to gather information, but an alternative approach would have been to test an hypothesis. In other words, come up with a statement about the subject which could be supported or disproved by the research. In this case, the hypothesis could have been car owners are ignorant of occupant safety issues and are unconcerned about safety as a factor when buying a car. Once the objectives for the research have been clearly identified, the method for doing the research has to be decided on. For the Vic Roads project, the decision was to use both qualitative and quantitative research. As the name suggests, quantitative research involves numbers and counting, gathering of specific data or information that you can put numbers to, while qualitative research is a more general exploration of attitudes and opinions about the subject that you're studying. For A.G.B. McNair, this is quite often the first stage in a research project.
Qualitative techniques generally use either a group discussion or an in-depth interview to collect the information. Now, a group discussion is where 6 or 8, say, people with a particular interest or a particular qualification sit around the table with the moderator and discuss an issue or a topic. And the moderator's task is simply to guide the discussion according to a checklist that he or she has to make sure people don't stray too far from the topic, which they can very easily do. Most group discussions, the attendees or the participants really enjoy themselves, and after they walk up, they really get stuck right into the topic that's under discussion. The other qualitative technique that's used is the in-depth interview, or a paired depth interview even. In this case, the interviewer is talking to one person at a time, or a couple of people at a time. And again, they're using a fairly unstructured or semi-structured interview process where they're working from a checklist or a set of guidelines and not asking yes-no questions, but asking why do you say that questions, or what do you do in the case of questions. And in that way you can get a lot of very powerful information, again, about why people behave the way they do or why they think the way they think, as opposed to just what they think or what they do.
The checklist used to lead the Vic Roads group discussions included what kind of car did people buy and where did they buy it? Have discussions on each of these features. Where did people go to find out about cars? And what information did they look for? Notice that the questions used to lead this type of session are what are called open questions. Questions like this are designed to stimulate discussion and search out attitudes and ideas, unlike the questions you would use in a questionnaire for which definite answers are sought, answers which are easier to handle as data, but more about that later. Following either a group discussion or in-depth interview, the findings are summarised. Usually this means going through recordings of the sessions and noting all the important points that are coming out of the discussion. One finding from the Vic Roads group discussion about attitudes to safety pointed to the fact that car buyers were more concerned about how easily their car could be damaged in an accident rather than how much protection it would give them from serious injury. In the report, quotes from the discussion were used to illustrate this. Another value of this qualitative research is that it can help a lot when it comes to designing the questionnaire for the final survey.
We wanted to include questions on how much they would pay for these added extras, and we found during the group discussion that the level of knowledge of these features was so low that people couldn't ascertain their worth and therefore couldn't rate whether they would prefer to have airbags or something else, because they didn't know enough about the product in order to decide. And so in the end we left the question of willingness to pay out of the questionnaire.
So, to summarise, qualitative research can be used as initial exploration for a research topic by using discussion either in a group or individually to look at the issues. It can help you to understand people's attitudes. It provides a good starting place for your research, and it can help you in the design of a survey questionnaire. Have a checklist to work with in the discussion and use a summary of people's responses as part of your research report. The next stage of the project is the quantitative research stage, the gathering of data, hard facts and figures which can be analysed. Interviewing is a popular technique to use, but the other possibilities would be observation or using data that is already available, such as through a government agency. The survey methods usually used by a market research company like AGB McNair include face-to-face interviews, where a researcher questions people in person, a questionnaire that might be mailed to people so they can fill it in, or interviewing people on the telephone. Face-to-face interviews at people's homes can allow for a detailed interview to be conducted in a relaxed situation. Some survey questionnaires could take as long as an hour to complete. Face-to-face interviews on the street are more likely to be used when a company wants to test a product like food, where the researcher can ask the person to taste, smell, touch a particular sample. It's been estimated that over 500,000 face-to-face interviews are sought in Australia each year, but for various reasons, such as people not being at home or being busy, it's usually expected that less than 50% of people approached for information will actually agree to take part in the survey. Self-completion surveys, generally handed or posted to people, are relatively cheap to perform because less researcher time is required. But response rates can be low for a market research company. There's a strong possibility that some questions may not be answered, and then people who do respond are more likely to be those with extreme views on the subject, and this will lead to obvious inaccuracies. A surveying method rapidly gaining popularity in the industry is the use of the telephone. A large number of people can be contacted quickly, and computer technology can be used. For the Vic Road survey, this was the system used for the quantitative survey. The questions are displayed on the computer screen in front of the operator. Then, as the answers are obtained, the information is keyed directly into the computer. The system is called CATI, which stands for Computer Assisted Telephone Interviewing, and the particular software package is an Australian product which has received worldwide acclaim.
Right, the first question is, have you or anyone in your household bought a new or used car in the past 6 months? Right. And are you the owner of a private car in your household which you bought personally and not a company car? And what is the make of this car?
With any of the survey techniques we have looked at, an important decision to be made is how to choose the people you are going to question. Ideally, you would ask everybody involved, in this case, every car owner in Victoria. This is called a census. Such a task would normally be out of the question, and a survey is conducted with just a part of the total group, and that's called a sample. This means that the people selected need to be representative of the total group. For the client of the market research company, this usually means a compromise between the cost of conducting the survey and the accuracy of the findings. There are a number of methods that can be used for selecting a sample for a survey, and the challenge is always to try to eliminate bias. In other words, to try and make sure that all members of the target group are represented in the sample. The face-to-face interview with people in a particular location, such as a shopping centre or any other public place, is called a convenience sample. Vic Roads could have interviewed people in car parks. As the name suggests, this can be a fast and convenient method of obtaining answers to questions for a survey, but it wouldn't be possible to estimate how accurately any of the views or opinions you obtained represent all Victorian car owners. Another method for obtaining a sample is to let the sample select itself. Self-completion questionnaires fall into this category, the volunteer sample. But remember, usually only people with strong opinions are likely to respond. And it's the same with those ring-in surveys on radio or television. It's not the general population's opinion, but the opinion of the show's audience, who felt sufficiently interested to ring. Another possibility is the judgmental sample. You might decide that because of your knowledge of the research subject, you could choose the sample yourself. Vic Rhodes could have surveyed car designers, medical experts and industry figures to convince the public about the importance of safe vehicle design. For a particular survey, it might be a good idea to specify certain characteristics of the sample that you want, so that there is an attempt to make the sample represent the total group. It might have been appropriate 50% female, or that the sample reflects the age range of car owners in the community. This might mean that 12% would need to be in the age range of 18 to 25. When details of the sample are specified like this, it's called quota sampling. With some methods of sampling, it's possible to actually predict how accurately the data you gather does apply to the rest of the group or population. This is when you use random sampling methods. By using the mathematics of probability, you can work out what is called an error margin. Methods that use this kind of sampling are called probability sampling methods. The sampling techniques we've looked at so far are called non-probability sampling methods. But choosing a random sample isn't quite as simple as it seems. For instance, if you just pick people from the street, you're ignoring all the people who have particular reasons for not being there, such as students who are at school, elderly people at home, or shift workers at work. A simple method of random sampling, if the target group or population is small, is to actually number or name the people involved and literally pull names out of a hat. Other methods that you can use to randomly select numbers include using the random number facility of a scientific calculator, a table of random numbers, or a phone book. Here, the last digits in a series of phone numbers can be considered random. For the survey that we're following, the use of the CATI computer telephone system meant that telephone numbers could be randomly assembled by the computer and dialed, something of a surprise for the 10% of people who are unlisted in the phone book. But even this system doesn't select a totally random sample of people, only a random sample of phone numbers. People who don't answer their phones are not included. And then there are the people who don't have the phone on in the first place. A popular sampling method is stratified sampling, and it's something like the quota sample. The total group is broken into important subgroups, or strata, and a sample is randomly selected from each of these. With the Vic Road survey, the sample consisted of a random sample of city telephone numbers and a random sample of country phone numbers. Stratified sampling is used to make sure these various subgroups are adequately represented. As mentioned before, the use of random sampling means that the maths of probability can be applied to the results and that an error margin can be quoted for the findings. This meant that AGB calculated a general error margin of approximately plus or minus 5%, with a 95% confidence level for the vehicle safety survey. Taking a detail of the survey, such as the knowledge car owners had about airbags, 76% of the sample accurately described these devices. The general plus or minus 5% error margin means that the chances are 95 in 100 that the figure for the total population actually lies between 71% and 81%. And if you are not already familiar with probability theory, it can be a bit of a surprise that the accuracy of the results depends not only on how many people are sampled, but also on the number of people who answer one way or another to a question. This error margin can be calculated mathematically, and strictly speaking, this should be worked out for each separate question. If you would rather leave the maths alone, you can use a table like this. It means that for the airbag question with a sample size of 400 interviews and 76% answering in a particular way, the error margin was closer to 4.3%. If you want to be able to predict the error margin for your survey, then you'll have to use one of these methods to work out the sample size you're going to need.
Yes, the question of sample size is a pretty thorny one for lots of people, and it really comes down to two factors. One is how much money you want to spend on doing the survey, or to put it a better way perhaps, how many resources you have available, all sorts of resources, from not just dollars, but to including the number of interviews you have available and how much time you've got to do it and so on. And the other aspect which works from the other side is how accurate or precise you want the results to be at the end of the day. Now, in a lot of market research applications such as product testing, experience has shown that, say, samples of 150 are adequate for a product test. In other cases, it really comes back to going back to the basic statistical formula and working out the sample size you need to achieve a given or a desired level of confidence or precision in the results. And there's no real shortcut, you have to go through the formula.
So, the methods of obtaining a sample included the non-probability methods, the convenience sample, the volunteer sample, the judgmental sample, and the quota sample. The probability samples were the simple random sample and the stratified random sample. But like the market research company, don't dismiss the use of the less sophisticated non-probability surveying techniques. These might give you reasonable estimates or useful indications for your project. You might not need to demonstrate the accuracy of your results with an error margin. When you've worked out the information you want, the surveying technique you are going to use, and the size of the sample you need, the next step is to design the questionnaire.
I suppose firstly you want to make sure it's covering the objectives of the study, that it is going to actually give you the information that you need, that it's valid information. Other factors are whether that it flows logically, that it's going to make sense from the respondent's point of view. So you need to be a little bit detached there to realise that here is a person who's suddenly just been rung up, they've answered the phone, or someone's knocked at their door and here's this market researcher asking them some questions. It's sort of just very broadly, a rule to follow is to start from the general and then go to the more specific. So, for example, if it's a product that's being researched, start off with general questions about the category, how they use it, how often they buy it, and then sort of hone down to more specific questions.
For the vehicle safety survey, this meant starting with general questions about vehicles owned and personal details of the owners. The more difficult questions about attitudes to safety were left until question 14.
With the questionnaire, that's what we're talking about, quantitative research there. And in the questionnaire, it's ideal to have as many closed-ended questions as possible.
Closed questions force a particular answer, perhaps a yes or no, a multiple choice answer, or the use of a scale. Some of the different kinds of scales that can be used include a nominal or naming scale identifying a specific answer, an ordinal scale ranking opinions or information, an agree-disagree scale, usually used to assess opinion or attitudes, and an interval scale, which lets the person being questioned select from equally spaced categories. In the Vic Road survey, even though many of the questions appeared to be open, the interviewer entered answers into a nominal or naming scale like this.
And where did you obtain the information which helped you decide on the car you bought? Was that a car dealer?
A lot of time can go into designing questions for a survey because the questions you ask and the way in which you ask them can be a source of considerable error or bias.
To help protect the lives of your loved ones, do you believe that anti-lock braking should be installed in all new cars? Do you believe that all car owners should be forced to have airbags in their cars, whether they want them or not? Does the radical improvement in potential vehicular occupant safety offered by offset frontal protection systems justify the projected increase in consumer pecuniary investment? When purchasing a vehicle, which of the following do you consider to be important? Image, appeal, colour, make, size, reliability, engine size, comfort, parking ease, resale value, steering, body type, styling, size of glove box, seat fabric, number of spark plugs, brakes, amount of chrome.
It is very hard to eliminate bias in a survey, both in the selection of the sample and in the design and application of a questionnaire. But the researcher's aim should always be to minimise it. This is why, in the Vic Road survey, some parts of the questions are not read out, or the order of questions is rotated. One way of checking to see if your questionnaire is going to work well is to pilot it. Try it out on a few people and see if it needs to be fine-tuned.
The reason for doing that is to find out if people have understood the questions, if they've been phrased properly. If we're getting strange answers, well, we realise we're not asking the question properly. Secondly, to find out if we've missed some response of people saying, oh, I bought my car because it's got really nice seats in it. If a whole lot of people saying that we haven't got seats on the questionnaire, we put that on.
In summary, make sure that your questionnaire covers the objectives of your project. Keep the questions as simple as possible. Move from general questions to more specific questions. If it's appropriate, remember to consider the use of scales. Attempt to reduce bias in both the wording of the questions and the way in which the questionnaire is presented. And do a pilot. Try out your questionnaire on a few people first. Once the survey has been carried out, the next step is to make some sense out of all the information you've collected. For AGB McNair, this usually means using computer technology to rapidly process the data that's been entered by the telephone operators. But the process can be reasonably simple, especially if your sample is small. Let's take one part of the Vic Road survey as an example. Question 10B asks, what information was most influential in helping you decide on the car you bought? A tally card is used to record the total number of positive responses for each section. A tally for all of question 10B looks like this, not really a complicated operation at all. Family and friends were the information source for 128 people out of the total group or population of 400. This is best expressed as a percentage, 32%. There are a number of ways of presenting the findings of a survey, and you can include explanations, summaries, and conclusions. A useful way of presenting quantitative results is to use graphs so that the information is easier to understand. We can use the data from this project to demonstrate some of these methods. The choice of graph includes the pie chart, the line chart, the bar or column chart, and the dot chart. Incidentally, a number of computer programs are available which will easily generate these graphs once you enter the data. The pie chart is useful when not more than about 5 slices are used, but it doesn't work very well when one of the segments is very small or when some of the sectors are nearly the same size. The line chart is useful to show a series of data measurements over a period of time, but more than 3 lines can start to look confusing. The line chart can be useful for displaying trends. Bar or column charts are useful to compare values, especially when there are a number of different categories to plot. A dot chart indicates single data values and can show a lot of values clearly without looking too cluttered. In addition to the charts, the report prepared by AGB McNair for Vic Roads expressed the results another way, this time as tables, with data drawn from the computer printouts. The AGB report also included an introduction which explained the background and the objectives for the survey, the details of the research design with descriptions of the qualitative and quantitative research programs, discussion of the error margin involved, the characteristics of the people surveyed, a summary of the findings under a number of headings which included quotes from the group discussion, and details of the actual qualitative and quantitative survey results. The appendices included details of the questions used for the group discussion and the survey questionnaire. So, with your own report, analyse your data using tally cards. If it's appropriate, express your results as percentages. Consider the use of graphs in your report. Also include details of the background to your project, your objectives or hypothesis, discussion of the method of survey that you used, and the sample selected, plus an appendix with your questionnaire. Once the AGB McNair report had been presented to Vic Roads, the Vic Roads research team were the first to examine the results.
Well, the first thing we do is look at the sample and see whether it matches the population that we were sampling from. That's the population of car owners. And fortunately, we have all this data on the Vic Roads computers, so we can find out what proportion of car owners are female, what proportion are male, what age groups they fall into, where they live, and that sort of thing. And so we obtain that information and then match it with that part of the sample. And fortunately this time we found that our random sampling worked very well, and that we had a very good match between what the characteristics of the sample and the population, even as far as the makes of cars that were sampled.
The person who was most eager to look at the general findings of the report was the manager of vehicle safety standards, Bob Gardner.
This first survey has given us an excellent tool, or two excellent tools for the future. One, it's given us a current reading, if you like, of what the community thinks out there or knows out there about safety, so we can use that to measure the performance of any other strategies or any new strategies we implement. So we get a performance measurement of that. But it's also given us a tool that has told us already where the community goes, for instance, for its information about car safety. And that means we can now better target all our programs for the future as well. We now know that a lot of people go, which was a surprise to me, go to their dealer and ask him about, or her, about how good this car is or what features it's got. Now, we could go out with information to the whole community, and we've got to target X number of million people in Victoria or Australia. But if we go to the dealers, we can really get a far more efficient delivery of that information to the community that we get to really the car buyers, not to thousands of people who are not going to buy cars. So it has certainly given us an excellent tool to work from, and we will continue, or intend to continue, monitoring that performance by repeating the survey or similar surveys.